Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee to order. And we start with the acknowledgement, of course. We meet in Ottawa on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. But as you can see in the grid, we have many nations represented. And here, where I am, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Chinantan First Nations. To ensure an orderly meeting, remember, speak and listen in the official language of your choice by selecting the interpretation within the globe at the bottom center of the screen. When speaking, slowly and clearly, please. You should be on mute when you are not speaking. Joining us today by video conference for the first hour are the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, Carolyn Bennett, and the Minister of Northern Affairs, Dan Vandal. They're accompanied by the following senior officials: Daniel Kwan Watson, Deputy Minister; Paula Isaac, Associate Deputy Minister; Serge Baudouin, Assistant Deputy Minister; Mary Louisa Capellas, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister; Annie Boudreau, Chief Finances, Results and Delivery Officer. So welcome to everyone. And I know that we have a really important meeting and a tight timeline. So I'm going to ask the ministers to speak opening comments up to 6 minutes each before we proceed with questions. And first of all, Minister Bennett, would you please go ahead for 6 minutes?
Kwai, ulakut, tansi, hello, bonjour. Je m'adresse à vous aujourd'hui.
I am speaking you today from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I wish to honor the waters they paddled and their moccasins, which walked these lands. Mr. Chair, it is an honor to appear again before this committee today to discuss my department's Supplementary Estimate C, as well as its 2021-2022 main estimates, and to answer your questions. I am appearing with my colleague, the Minister of Northern Affairs, and supported by our officials, led by Deputy Minister Daniel Kwan Watson. The COVID-19 pandemic has presented challenges to everyone in Canada, especially people living in First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. The priority of Indigenous leadership has been to keep their people safe.
Our government has been there to support First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities through the fight against COVID-19. We had daily calls with the three ministers, and we are so grateful for the truly amazing public servants working 24/7. And we'll be there as we work towards the recovery and building back better, socially, economically, and environmentally. Reconciliation and self-determination are essential to a strong recovery and also represent the core of my mandate. No one wants to go back to normal. We now have the opportunity to bring all Canadians with us as we accelerate the progress to self-determination and support Indigenous communities as they implement their own visions for the future. Our commitment to advancing reconciliation and accelerating self-determination is not only reflected in the estimates being considered today, but everything we do on a day-to-day basis. So in the 2021 Supplementary Estimate C, they reflect a net increase of $138.6 million for CERNAC, which brings the total budgetary authorities for 2021 to $6.9 billion. Some of the key priorities that funding from the Supplementary Estimate C will support is the implementation of the Métis government recognition and self-government agreements, the implementation of the Canada's collaborative self-government fiscal policy, engagement to support the introduction of Bill C-15, and supporting the coordination and implementation of the National Action Plan on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, Two-Spirit, and LGBTQIA+ people. Notably, the $35.6 million to implement the Métis government recognition and self-government agreements signed with the Métis Nation of Ontario, Métis Nation Saskatchewan, and the Métis Nation of Alberta will support their visions of self-determination and their ability to determine their own political, economic, social, and cultural development. The $8.2 million for fiscal transfer agreements with self-governing Indigenous governments will support ongoing funding to these governments, as well as the enforcement activities under the Teslin Tlingit Council Administration of Justice Agreement. In addition, $5.2 million is assigned to support the engagement in the process of Bill C-15, and the current version of Bill C-15 built on the momentum and the support from Indigenous groups for the former private members bill C-26 of Romeo Saganash is a reflection of our ongoing engagement with Indigenous partners. Moving forward on Bill C-15 is the right thing to do, and I look forward to working closely with all of you during your examination of the bill over the next few weeks and on potential further improvements to the bill. We are grateful for your pre-study. The funding of $2.6 million over 3 years for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, Two-Spirit, LGBTQIA+ people will help ensure that survivors and family members can continue to be meaningfully participating in the development and ongoing implementation of the National Action Plan. The MMIWG Secretariat, led out of Cernak, will provide support to the National Family and Survivors Circle to ensure that they are included, supported, and connected with all the working groups and at the very center of the process. So in the mains, Crown Indigenous Relations 2021 will be approximately $4.7 billion. While this reflects a net decrease of $189 million or 4% as compared to last year's main estimates, this is mainly due to the anticipated settlement of claims. And as you know, main estimates do not reflect the additional funding made available throughout the year through the supplementary estimates and cannot ever be viewed as a complete picture of the intended spending. In closing, I know you all agree that the top priority of this government during this difficult time has been the safety and physical and mental health of all Canadians, including First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and especially their elders. I'm proud that even in these extraordinary times, our government has continued to advance reconciliation, to right wrongs, and accelerate the self-determination for Indigenous peoples in Canada. Miigwech, Kuyanomik, Marci, thank you, merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Minister. Minister Van Daal for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Tansi Boshu, greetings and hello. Bonjour. Pour commencer,
I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking with you today from my office in St. Boniface, Saint-Vital, Treaty 1 territory, and the traditional territory of Métis Nation. And I'm very pleased to join you virtually by Minister Bennett's side to talk to you about the Supplementary Estimates C and also the 2022 main estimates and explain what the Canadian government is doing to help First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation during the pandemic.
Northerners present their own challenges in these COVID times. And while the pandemic is certainly not over, there is hope down the way. I thank you for this opportunity to discuss the important work we are doing to confront the COVID-19 situation and mitigate its impacts in the North, as well as to answer your questions on Supplementary Estimate C, as well as the main estimates. These estimates reflect our government's commitment to creating greater economic opportunity and supporting a higher quality of life in Canada's North and Arctic. Furthermore, these estimates demonstrate our government's firm intention to continue working to renew our relationship with Indigenous peoples, as well as tackling climate change and its impacts, promoting economic development, economic growth, for Northern communities, and creating quality jobs for the people of the North and the Arctic. Growing the economy while protecting the environment and addressing climate change is a priority for our government. And despite the challenges we all faced in 2020, this year was still a year of progress and successes. In November of this year, with the government of Yukon, we introduced the COVID-19 Recovery Research Program. And as I reported to the committee in November, Northerners should not have to worry about putting food on their table or ensuring a continued supply of essential items. Our government provided an additional investment of $25 million to Nutrition North Canada. We've also introduced the new Harvester Support Grant, which is increasing Northerners' access to country foods by providing funding to support traditional hunting, harvesting, and food sharing, and marked the formation of the Task Force on Post-Secondary Education in the North. The supplementary estimates reflects a net increase of $138.6 million for CERNAC, including $120.9 million in new funding and $17.7 million of net transfers with other government departments. The total budgetary authorities for 2020 will be $6.9 billion. And more specifically, as announced in the 2020 Fall Economic Statement, the $64.7 million is allotted to funding for Northern supports to territorial governments to support steps taken to respond to the pandemic. This initiative will contribute to ensure territorial governments have the capacity and the resources required to enforce preventative measures and afford medical options to limit the spread of COVID-19 and address regional challenges related to the pandemic and take immediate action to protect health and safety. Le budget principal des dépenses de
CERNAC's 2021-22 main estimates will be approximately $4.7 billion. This reflects a net decrease of $189 million compared to last year's main estimates, which my colleague, Minister Bennett, spoke to. While there was an overall decrease in these main estimates, they also reflect increases in support of key initiatives such as the Northern Abandoned Mine Reclamation Program, which is building a better future for Canada's North by addressing federal contaminated sites. The government's main objective is to provide support to help curb spread of COVID-19 and ensure that communities are supported throughout the pandemic. And we will continue to work with our territorial and Indigenous partners to ensure that all remote and northern communities are protected and are in a strong position to recover when we can do so safely.
To acknowledge the hard work of territorial and Indigenous partners, public health officials, and frontline workers who've done an incredible job of distributing and administering vaccines across the North. Last week, eligibility opened up for every Northerner in the territories over the age of 18, which is only 4 months after the first shipments arrived in Canada. I think we can all acknowledge the significance of this milestone, but we know there's still much more work to do. Again, I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak to you, and I look forward to your questions. Merci.
Minister, thank you very much, and Minister Bennett. And we go to 6-minute round of questioning now. With I have on my list Mr. Schmale, Mr. Van Couverden, Madame Bérubé, Ms. Blaney, and Jamie Schmale. Please go ahead for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to our witnesses. Can I start with Minister Bennett, if possible? Minister, I'd like to talk to you about the McGillis family and the Yucao Lake lawsuit settlement. Minister, as you know, my predecessor, Kathy McLeod, sent you a letter on December 4th regarding the McGillis family. As you may recall, Minister, the McGillis family are certificate holders of the Yucao Lake Settlement Agreement. That's an agreement that was signed by you to settle the Yucao Lake bombing range matter, also an agreement that the McGillis family was not consulted on. Your response was to send the courts the verdict. With respect to your response, Minister, it reads, how could the federal Crown in 2015 say to the federal court, in the Mohawks litigation that the band has no right to claim or collect damages to reserve lands covered by a certificate of possession, and then to take the opposite position, inconsistent with the case law before Justice Strickland in 2020.
Thanks so much, Jamie. And I would love to have the opportunity to explain really how these things work. And it means that that the negotiations are undertaken in a confidential and privileged way with without prejudice, based on that the Canada negotiates with the chief and council that represent the community. Canada encouraged at the time the discussions between the Enoch Cree Nation and the certificate of possession holders to resolve their internal issues. And as was outlined in the response, like all members of the Enoch Cree Nation, they were privy to all of the information shared with them by the chief and council during the negotiation process. And they had the right to participate in the community's ratification process and to cast their vote for or against the agreement. Obviously, the community voted for the agreement. So the federal court decision was attached to the response in order to clarify in detail that the settlement between Canada and the Enoch Cree Nation could not preclude the McGillis's family action from proceeding. They have that right. But in its decision, the court found that preventing the settlement and therefore delaying compensation to all the Enoch Cree members collectively and individually would not be in the public interest. So, as is their right, the plaintiffs have appealed to the federal court decision. In response, we noted the federal court's decision was clear and left no legal impediment to Canada's ratifying of the settlement agreement. So, ratifying and the settlement and paying the compensation was the right thing to do. And I know that because it's still before the court, I'm not able to meet with them, but I'm not sure if Deputy Quan Watson has anything additional to add.
Maybe I'll ask the deputy in the second part. Well, I guess what I'm also asking is, given that the family, the McGillis family, are an Indigenous family, they are certificate holders of the land. Obviously, they are a bit upset and concerned the fact that they were not, or they feel they were not consulted on this, and they also feel that the order in council was rushed through. Can you explain that hurry?
Sure. Thank you for the question, member. These actions go back to the 1940s and 50s and 60s, and the government has admitted having done wrong in those instances. So I think 70, 80 years after the facts occurred, it's difficult to say that we were rushing. And I think the First Nation argued for a long time that we dragged our feet for too long. The compensation that was offered under this deal is one it's clear that there needs to be part set aside in case there are other claims against it. I would note that this is the type of claim, because of the passage of time, if it hadn't been for the specific claims policy, probably would have been impossible for individuals to bring forward. So the existence of the policy, the negotiations, meant we were able to recognize and pay compensation where we would not otherwise have been able to do it. And we did not penalize the community as a whole because of this appeal, recognizing in particular that if there was an issue between the family and the community, that it could be dealt with in the courts and that there would money be available to have that addressed.
Thank you. I just want to switch gears here. In response to COVID-19, the Financial Management Board drew upon its capacity to understand and analyze financial statements to qualify the $1.9 billion impact that the pandemic is having on its own source revenues of First Nations across Canada. Now, after issuing this revenue research report in October, the government committed in the fall economic statement to $332.8 million to support First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities in 2021-22 to offset declines in OSR and to help ensure that these communities continue to provide the same level of service that their members demand. So, Minister, I understand the money, from what we've been hearing, is not flowing with time ticking. Is there a plan to get this money out this year?
Time is ticking. 20 seconds. Please go ahead.
Thank you for that. And there's no question that we've heard from many nations about the problem with own source revenue through this, and that's why, in terms of Indigenous businesses and so many other supports that we've put in place. But I think we know we will have to do more as that really has impacted the kind of services that nations have been able to deliver.
Thanks very much, Minister. And Jamie, and off to Adam Van Koeverden. 6 minutes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'm joining today from the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabeg, the Ottawa-Darren, and more recently the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as many others. And I'm very grateful to be joining here and talking about these important issues. Speaking of important issues, I'm a strong believer that Bill C-15, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, is some of the most important work that we'll be doing on this committee. And Minister Bennett, I know that you'll be coming back next month to discuss Bill C-15 and how important it is with us. But the supplementary estimates do include additional funding for that bill, and I was hoping that you could give us a sense of the engagement that the government has done to develop the bill, because it's been a hot topic of discussion among us, and particularly with our Indigenous partners, and just a little bit of a prelude for Bill C-15, if you could.
Thanks for the question, and I think that for all of those that have been fighting to have Canada formally acknowledge the important work of so many Canadians, like Grand Chief Willie Littlechild at the UN for so long, that this is an exciting time to actually have it declared and to supplement the understanding in Section 35 rights, and to be able to even be able to have that clarity that allows people going forward. And so I think that we know that Romeo Saganash's Bill 262 went through the full parliamentary process and was passed in the House of Commons. It got stalled in the Senate, but I think that the kinds of engagements that Minister Lametti has undertaken have been extraordinary, because there were over 70 virtual sessions. There were so many bilateral sessions with the National Indigenous organizations. But I particularly, Adam, you would love this, with the young Indigenous law students and young Indigenous leaders, that they took what is a static declaration and improve the legislation so that two-spirited people and the gender diverse people, the diversity within Indigenous communities here in Canada is now reflected in both the preamble and in the body of the bill. And so we've ended up with a better bill, and we will continue to do the work. And then we will have to have 3 years to be able to develop a serious action plan to make sure all the laws of Canada are in keeping with that bill.
Oh, I know that we're all very grateful for that work and for that consultation. But on the theme of consultation, Bill C-15 requires that the designated minister, in consultation and in cooperation with Indigenous peoples and with other federal ministers, prepare and implement an action plan to achieve the objectives of this declaration. Now, it's come up quite a few times on this committee, and I've heard it discussed as well. Is this just a statement, or is there action that will come of it? So I think this committee would really benefit from your sentiments with respect to, and your thoughts on, what this government bill would produce in terms of action and the process and the preparation and the implementation of that action plan.
Well, thank you for that. And again, we will obviously need to work in close partnership with our, the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis partners, particularly around what needs to happen in all the bills across Canada. What are the priorities? What are the changes that need to be there? It's not quite the same as when in the same-sex benefits, where it's sort of like just find it across all the bills and just replace it. This is going to be significant as to what are the priorities, but it also means that various regions, I know that Regional Chief Adamak in the Yukon is wanting to do a much deeper dive, not only on the bill, but into the implementation plan as to how that would affect her region. And I think we are helping and supporting that kind of work coast to coast to coast.
Thank you. That's super helpful and very insightful. Mr. Chair, how am I doing for time?
1 minute.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, I'll continue on with Minister Bennett if I could, and if we could change the subject a little bit, just towards the collaborative self-government fiscal policy. Your reflections on this are a little bit in your opening statement, but perhaps I think we have about 30 seconds for that.
Half a minute. Go ahead.
Thanks so much. I think the collaborative fiscal is one of the most extraordinary things that we've been able to do as a government. That working with all of the self-governing nations for them to develop what would be the fiscal model that they will need to run their own governments. And I think that has been extraordinary to see that work done in a collaborative way, that we came up with the funding model together. And it's actually, most of them are now receiving more than 3 times what they would have gotten under the Indian Act. And there's also a tremendous collaboration that has happened watching these self-governing nations work throughout COVID in collaboration with one another, setting priorities that help one another, but also as they've moved towards their new proposal around infrastructure, which is exciting.
Thanks very much. Bennett. Thanks, Mr. Van Koeverden. Madame Bérubé, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. I represent a Cree Anishinaabe and Nunavik AU territory, and my question is for Honourable Minister Bennett. We talk a lot about violence against women in Native lands. It's unfortunate. In 2019, the government indicated a national plan for the disappeared women and girls, and it would be published in 2020. In May 2020, the government postponed indefinitely the National Action Plan because of the pandemic. Could you please describe the progress made for the National Action Plan since June 2020? Thank you. And we stand with the survivors of all of the disappeared and assassinated women and girls and LGBTQ1A people. In answer to the very first inquiry of that tragedy, our government worked with provinces and territories and Native governments, the victims, their families, to develop a national action plan to establish a very clear roadmap, one that would guarantee the safety of women and girls and two-spirited and LGBTQA Native peoples in their communities and in urban areas as well. Working groups made up of Indigenous women leaders, along with urban groups and two-spirited groups, and family circles, survivors, and also First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. Everybody is working either alone or together with all groups and subcommittees. The Yukon government has already delivered their work, their homework, and which is a very good example for all governments and territories. I am confident that the plan is efficient but also accountable, and that in the future it will serve to measure and then adapt to arrive at good results. Also, could you talk about the repercussions for Native women and girls given the delayed publication of the National Action Plan? What are the impacts? I do hope that the repercussions will serve to improve relationships and to change things in our institutions, to do away with systemic racism, to have an approach where all Canadians can examine their role in the reconciliation process and provide safety for women and girls and two-spirited Indigenous peoples. Because this is a shared endeavor. It is a good conversation between the Quebec Minister, Lafrenière, last week, and this subsequent to the Vienne Commission. These are recommendations and calls for justice. I think that altogether it is a good plan for Quebec, but also for all of Canada. At what point in time do you think that the National Action Plan for disappeared women and girls will be published? The Circle of Families and for Survivors would like to have a version for the calls for justice that would be more simplified for more ordinary men and women, that is, to meet their expectations, to be able to live safely.
Thanks very much. That brings us to our next question round with Rachel Blaney. Rachel, go ahead, 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to both the ministers and your staff for being here today with us. My first question is, we are doing another study, and I would hate to count how many studies we've done on food security in the North, but we're doing another one, and hopefully this one will actually see some action in the future. But President Obed from ITK said, and I'm going to quote him, "The primary issue is the purpose of the program," and I'm talking about Nutrition North. "If the purpose of the program is that it's a social program with 100% of the money going to the people who need it, then we need a program that is completely transparent and accountable. Point of sale rebate is a marketing tool, but it is not an mechanism in the way that is being used. Until we fix these systemic problems that make the Nutrition North program open to interpretation, I think people will continue to say that it isn't working for them and that they demand a better Nutrition North program. I think we're hearing loud and clear from people, and all the testimony we've heard in the last few weeks has been very, very clear. The program is still not working. People are still struggling to get appropriate nutrition, especially Indigenous communities. So in the subs, of course, you have announced that there are more resources, but I'm wondering, is there any practice investment that is going to look at the program, assess it, and maybe make it more of a social program that actually reflects the needs of the people in those communities?
Thank you so much. That's an important question, so thanks for asking it. And I get a lot of questions and feedback about the program. I can tell you that, first of all, the whole issue of food insecurity is a lot more complex and multifaceted than one program. Nutrition North for those that don't know, helps make nutritious foods more affordable and accessible to residents that are isolated in northern communities if they lack year-round road, rail, or marine access. Basically, the government for several years has championed the Nutrition North program. There is a Nutrition North Advisory Committee who regularly meet to discuss these issues and how the program could be made into a better program. But on its own, I think it's a valuable program that subsidizes nutritious food.
Here, sorry to interrupt you, Minister.
Okay.
Is that it's not a social program. So I think that the committee is well aware of the program. I mean, like I said, we're doing a study on it, so we've heard a lot.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think that the particular challenge is it's still a point of sale, and it doesn't put the power in the people who are purchasing. It puts the power in the people who are selling. It's not a social program. It's not giving to the people who have the least amount. And so there's definitely a concern there. So I'm just wondering, will you be reviewing your program at all? And is there any dedicated funds into meaningfully reviewing this program so that it works more beneficially?
Absolutely. We are constantly reviewing the programs we roll out. I've referenced the Nutrition North Advisory Committee that's always taken a review of what we're doing.
Okay, but
I think
it's
it's important to note that the auditor general as well is reviewing Nutrition North, and there are improvements. The Harvester Support Grant is something that came out of the co-development between the advisory committee, ITK, and the people who operate Nutrition North. As you know, Harvester Support Program is creative. It's a subsidy for Inuit nations and Indigenous nations to get back on the land to have access to more country food, which has long been called for. So there's room for improvement.
The other challenge, of course, Minister, as you well know, is the climate change impacts and how there is that wanting to be out there on the country, but not being able to. So thank you so much for answering that. I just want to move over to Minister Bennett now. I appreciate the conversation earlier about Bill C-15. I encourage you so much to talk to your government and make sure that we actually see it being debated in the House. We saw what happened in the last Parliament. I certainly don't want to see that happen again, and it needs to be debated. I appreciate the committee is doing the pre-study, but if we're not debating in the House, the process isn't happening. And so I encourage you to do that. But one of the questions that I have for you around reconciliation is the issue, and you and I have talked about this, Carolyn, of enforcement. We've heard in the last study that we did about the impacts of COVID-19 on Indigenous communities that one of the biggest challenges was their inability to enforce ban bylaws. So they weren't able to call somebody when people were gathering in bigger groups. And we've heard again and again in different studies that enforcement continues to be a challenge. Local police or RCMP don't know how to follow through on certain things. There seems to be a disconnect between the governance structures and the local law enforcement, and that's continuing to bring up big issues. So I'm just wondering, is there any commitment from your government to help bridge that gap so that we can see more reconciliation?
20 seconds, please.
Thanks so much. And I, as you know, Minister Blair and Minister Miller are working on making Indigenous policing an essential service. But I think in in nations like Kwangtung with Chief Doris Bill, having the 4 peace officers who can have dropped the calls to the RCMP by 30-40%, that I think these models of really autonomy in community safety are really where I think we want to be very, very supportive.
Thanks very much, Minister. And we go to a 5-minute question with Mr. Melillo for 5 minutes. Eric, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to direct my questions to Minister Vandal. Minister, I have a Globe and Mail article here in front of me that just from a couple of weeks ago, and I obviously won't read the whole thing, but the headline is "Top Defense Official Says China is a Threat to Canadian Arctic." It goes on to talk about China's push for natural resources and that they're turning their attention, or I should say have been turning their attention, to the Northwest Passage for some time. Minister, we know that there is depleting defense infrastructure in the north, and that many individuals, many organizations have been raising concerns about the Communist Chinese Party for years. So why has there been such little urgency from your government in terms of securing our Arctic sovereignty? I believe you're on mute.
Sorry. I certainly wouldn't agree with that statement. I agree with the reality of climate change, and climate change is occurring 3 times faster in the north than it is in the south. That's a very important factor. I think that's something that is reality, and we are a government that acknowledges reality. So it is. First of all, I don't agree with the premise of your question. Our government is taking a whole of government approach to issues of the North because they are so very important, whether it's Northern affairs or foreign affairs or national defense. We are actively engaged with Inuit nations that live in the North. So we are actively engaged, consulting, and we're taking a whole of government approach to the many important issues that face the North. We are working through the framework of the Arctic and Northern Policy Framework to align all the territories, the Indigenous nations, and align the investments that are occurring in the North. And you're right; those issues are so very important. Whether it's the Chinese or the Russians or other Arctic nations, we're actively engaged as well with the Arctic Council, who are talking about all of these important issues.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do have limited time, of course, as you know, so I'd like to get to some other issues as well. And I would like to pick up on the issue of food security as well. It seems sort of a reoccurring theme with this government is that you increase funding, you spend a lot of money, but there's actually worse outcomes for Canadians. And I think that the Nutrition North program, Nutrition North Canada, is a pretty solid example of that. We've seen funding continue to increase under this government. However, according to Library of Parliament research, rates of food insecurity across the territories, across the North, have actually been continuing to increase. So with that in mind, considering you're spending more and getting worse results when it comes to food security, would you agree that the current policies of this government have failed to address food insecurity?
Absolutely disagree with that. I think, first of all, Nutrition North is an important program, but I think the premise that we're going to solve all the food insecurity issues in Canada and in the North through one program is faulty. I think Nutrition North has been around for 11, 12 years now. We've invested in it because I think it's a good program. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. We are working with the Nutrition North Advisory Council. We're working with ITK. We're working with other Indigenous nations, territories, to try to expand upon it. I think it was absolutely necessary we spend an extra $25 million during the pandemic to make sure that the people who are suffering from food insecurity have more resources to get to them. So I'm certainly not going to apologize for spending more money on Nutrition North during COVID-19. That's something that was absolutely necessary. It had to be done. There's room for improvement, and we're going to work with the Advisory Council.
Thank you. Minister, I'd just like to ask simply, how do you measure success of the Nutrition North program? You're saying you disagree with my premise. You believe it's things are going well, that it's a success. Food insecurity is rising. That's a fact. That's not me telling you this. This is Library of Parliament research. So how would you measure success of the Nutrition North program?
I think Nutrition North is a part of the solution. It's certainly not the entire solution. We have to look at other Government of Canada initiatives, such as what agriculture is doing. Ken or
I can appreciate that, and I agree with that. But is there a way that you measure success of the Nutrition North program specifically?
We have to work with other territorial governments, with Indigenous nations, to make sure the money in Nutrition North is going where it's supposed to, that we're getting the best bang for the dollar, and I think keep improving by working with the Nutrition North Advisory Council.
Thanks,
programs.
Minister.
Thank you.
We're out of time. We move to Brenda Shanahan. Welcome to the committee, Brenda, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and it's a privilege to be here on this committee tonight, being able to address some questions. Certainly, I'm learning at the same time. So I do have a couple of questions for Minister Van Dal. But first of all, very exciting to learn about the vaccine rollout in the north, that the northern communities, that there's now vaccination, the entire adult population. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this came to be?
Yes, it's absolutely a great news story. Vaccines have been rolling out very, very effectively in all 3 territories. I believe that within the next few weeks, there's the opportunity for everybody who wants a vaccine in the territories will be able to receive one. And I believe that Premier Savikatag of Nunavut actually announced this morning that there were 0 cases of COVID in Nunavut, which is absolutely incredible. If you'll remember, Brenda, when COVID started about a year ago, actually almost to the day, or certainly the week, the thought was that if we didn't do a good job of working with the leadership of the North and with the people who live in the North, that it could be an absolute tragedy up there in terms of COVID spread. And I really have to tip my hat to the territorial governments, to the Indigenous nations, and to the organizations that are in the North, all 3 territories, for taking those tough decisions on isolation, shutting down the borders, on making sure that their internal healthcare systems were functioning as well as they could, for asking for help from the federal government. And from the beginning, we've been engaged with them. I certainly have as Northern Affairs Minister. But I know that Dominic LeBlanc, as Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, the Finance Minister, the Prime Minister have also been engaged with the leadership and the people of the North. And I think that both replicates.
Well, thank you for that. It certainly is a testament, I think, to both autonomy of managing one's own affairs and also collaboration. I'll never forget, as a member of the Public Account Committee in the last Parliament, the late Michael Ferguson, our Auditor General at that time, telling us that his biggest, how shall we say, regret, or the thing that he wanted, the message that he wanted to leave to all parliamentarians, was how we had up until that point failed Indigenous and Northern peoples, and that we had to do better. We could do better, and I like to think that he's able to see the improvement in a crisis situation that was able to occur.
Yeah.
If you could tell us a little bit more about the isolation hubs, how did that come to be such a critical tool?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's important. Back in April, it actually blows my mind, that was a year ago. Back in April, our government announced $130 million to support the Northern Territories. That included more money for food security, healthcare supports, and support for regional airlines, because that's absolutely key. We know the airlines have been going through a very, very difficult time. But in the north, if the airlines are disconnected or if the supply chain is broken, food does not get up there, medicine does not get up there. So it was absolutely essential that we make sure that those northern regional airlines got the support they needed. And I commend Transport Minister of the time, Marc Garneau, for making sure that all the northern airlines and provincial northern airlines as well got the support they needed. $75 million took them to the end of the year, with the opportunity to invest another 125 million over the next the upcoming year. And I hope we don't need it. But to your question on isolation hubs, the fall economic statement was I believe it was $65 million that went to all three territories, and it was almost exclusively for isolation hubs and or healthcare infrastructure. We know infrastructure in the north is not what it is in the south. There's a lot of help whether it's traditional infrastructure or housing or healthcare infrastructure. It's a bigger housing issue actually that we can have a long conversation about. But their ask of myself and Minister Freeland was money for isolation hubs. So if people did get infected and had to isolate, they had the room to isolate. So in
we'll
working,
have to stop there, Minister. We're
Okay.
over time, and move on to Madame Bérubé, 2.5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you. My question is Mr. Van Daal. Earlier you said that in the north we have a climate crisis. You talked about innovation for hunters and gatherers, and then the mine restoration program in the north. 64.7 million for all of the assistance in the north. Does it cover that? What portion of funding will be given to each of the territorial governments?
J'étais en sordine.
Sorry, I was on mute. That's an excellent question. I know that since the very beginning, we were there to support the people living in the north, and we worked very closely with the premiers of Nunavut and the other two territories. Back in April, we invested $130 million in all three territories. This was support for food security, also support for health and for the regional airlines, as well as to support business people in the communities. So with the September investment, which was 65 million, which was exclusively for isolation hubs, medical infrastructure, because we know that infrastructures in the far north are in need of assistance. Residential infrastructures, but also medical infrastructure. So with speaking to the elected officials in the far north, isolation hubs were identified as being priorities for them. There's simply no space for people to isolate themselves. So we did invest 65 million in all three territories for isolation hubs. This was in partnership with the governments in the territories.
Thanks, Madame Bérubé. Rachel Blaney, 2.5 minutes. Go ahead. Rachel, are you there? Where did Rachel go? There you are. Right. Mute.
Hi, sorry about that. I got cut off. My computer's been weird today. Is it my turn? Sorry, I wasn't here, so I don't know.
2.5. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, and I appreciate all of your patience. If I could come back to Minister Bennett, in my riding, there's a group of amazing young women who make buttons and earrings. It's their Little Red Dress campaign, and they sell those buttons and they sell those earrings, and they are beautiful, and I encourage everybody to purchase some. But the reason that they do it is so that they can put up billboards to alert people to the fact that there are missing women, Indigenous women. And they put up the billboards and they have the picture of the woman on the billboard, and they give contact information to try to help their families. So I'm a little frustrated by how long this is taking to fully be implemented, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls strategy. We know that along so many highways, so many places across this country, Indigenous women and girls are gone, they're murdered, and we never hear from them again. So I'm just wondering if you could speak about how long is this going to take to get the actual work in place? How long are people going to have to fundraise so that they can try to save lives and reconnect family?
Thank you for the question. And I think your example of really what's happening on the ground is really, really important. And I think this is the reason it was the first ever national public inquiry, where we need the support of provinces and territories, Indigenous governments themselves, such that all of us are working together to have Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited and gender diverse people safe wherever they are. I think these kind of local initiatives are really important, because we, of course, from 2015 started investing in all of the things that we had been told before that were in the platform, and put in place the family liaison units that would help families navigate the justice system, get the information they know, and those have been hugely successful. But as on the Highway of Tears, Rachel, with those billboards, we now know with social media that the kind of missing persons and just, as we learned, so sad, tragically, that this is still happening. Yeah. And so we're going to do this in a comprehensive way that'll be accountable to make sure that as we put in place the concrete actions to stop this tragedy, that we will continue to measure and adapt not only the outcomes, but the causes of the causes, and to make sure that we are making progress on all of those things as we go forward. Thanks. And that I hope that, that those local initiatives end up supported and getting real results.
Thanks to everyone. Thanks to our ministers and our staff for joining us. We're going to conclude this session right now, a brief suspension, and set up our next minister and guests. This meeting is briefly suspended. And welcome our guests, whom you've all met through the sound check. With us for the second hour, along with the staffers that we have just met, is our Minister of Indigenous Services, Mark Miller. And so, Minister Miller, would you please go ahead for up to 6 minutes, and then we'll get to our questions. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Kwekwe, ulukut, tanse, hello et bonjour. Avant de commencer, je tiens à souligner que
Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm here in Ottawa on unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin people, and I welcome this opportunity to provide you with an update on our continuing effort to confront the evolving COVID-19 pandemic and to answer your questions on Supplementary Estimates C and the main estimates. COVID-19 has presented many challenges for all of us, and in particular at-risk or underserved communities throughout this time. Indigenous Services Canada supported First Nations, Inuit, and Métis to ensure that they have the resources they need to keep their communities safe and respond to COVID-19. I would like to thank the committee for the report that was presented before the Chamber with regard to the crisis, COVID-19 and Indigenous peoples from crisis towards meaningful change. So there's been more than $4 billion invested in regard to COVID-19, and more recently, we've worked with key partners to support self-determination and community actions for the administration of vaccines in Indigenous communities. And also, we've developed agricultural approaches to foster that have also served to foster reconciliation.
Exist in Canada. It's why our pandemic preparedness response and recovery actions need to prioritize health equity to protect the people of Canada from the threat of COVID-19 and future pandemics. As we support vaccine administration and vaccine rollout for Indigenous adults living in cities and towns across Canada, it's a race to get the last person vaccinated, not the first. With vaccine production ramping up at Pfizer and the recent approval of the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccines, we can confidently opportunity before fall 2021. As of March 18th of 2021, for the committee, 200,560 doses have been administered in First Nations and Inuit communities in the provinces and to residents in the territories. Vaccinations are underway in 586 Indigenous and territorial communities. Over the past 2 months, members of the Canadian Rangers have worked in more than 25 communities across the Anishinaabe Nation in Northern Ontario, in particular, helping provincial authorities with tasks related to immunization. This is in addition to the 46 First Nation communities that the CAF has supported in recent months to manage COVID-19 outbreaks and facilitating vaccine distribution. As announced last week by the Prime Minister, my department and the Canadian Armed Forces will soon begin supporting an unparalleled accelerated vaccination program in a number of isolated First Nation communities, as well as a select number of larger Indigenous communities starting in Manitoba. We're currently working closely with Public Safety and the Canadian Armed Forces to expand on an accelerated vaccine rollout in First Nations communities in the northern part of Manitoba. And over the next few days, we'll be working in partnership with Indigenous leadership to assess community needs and ensure the appropriate CAF resources are sent to communities requiring assistance. This deployment may include up to 23 different communities, and more details will be shared as we proceed with planning in the coming days. Now let me turn to the estimates items. With Supplementary Estimate C, the total authorities for 2020-2021 will be $17.8 billion. These supplementary estimates reflect a net increase of $1.5 billion. Of this, $1.1 billion is related to various COVID-19 response measures previously announced, including $530 million to support surge health infrastructure, primary care nursing surge capacity, and urgent public health responses in Indigenous communities. $380 million in additional funding for the Indigenous Community Support Fund, $63.9 million for supportive care in Indigenous communities, and $58 million to Indigenous community businesses. As a clarifying note, several COVID-19 initiatives were previously authorized under the Public Health Events of National Concern Payments Act. Following the repeal of the Act, ISC is requesting the unspent amount as voted appropriations through the Sub-C estimates to continue these initiatives. These estimates also include, among other things, additional funding to improve access to safe, clean drinking water in First Nations communities to support the implementation of the Act respecting First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children, youth, and families, as well as to reimburse First Nations in emergency management response and recovery activities. For 2021-2022, the department's main estimates are $13.5 billion. This reflects a net increase of about $693.9 million, or 5% compared to last year's main estimates. Our two biggest increases are a net increase of $508.6 million in 2021-2022 to improve access to safe, clean drinking water in First Nations communities, and an increase of $122.6 million in 2021-22 for supportive care in Indigenous communities. Before concluding and proceeding to questions, I would like to address two additional points. First, the current situation in Piganjicum First Nation. These reports of harassment towards members of the community are extremely concerning and require a thorough investigation by the police. Our top priority is ensuring the health and safety of the community members and the staff that support that community. Due to the safety and security concerns, the ISK primary care practitioners were evacuated yesterday evening. The choice to relocate the healthcare staff after some time was not a decision that was taken lightly and was only done after careful consideration and planning to ensure necessary resources are in place to serve community members in the event medical assistance is required. I want to assure everyone that we are working in partnership with the community to find a long-term solution that meets the health and security needs of both community members and healthcare workers. Secondly, as this is World Water Day, I would like to take a brief moment to highlight that last week, the Chief and Council of Wet'suwet'en First Nation confirmed that they had lifted their long-term drinking water advisory, which had been in place since 2012. With this, our government, working in partnership with First Nations, has now lifted 102 long-term drinking water advisories since 2015. During the same time, 177 short-term advisories have also been lifted, ensuring clean drinking water to First Nations. Projects are also underway in 38 communities to resolve the remaining 58 long-term drinking water advisories. This commitment to clean drinking water is not just about ending long-term drinking water advisories. It's about building sustainable systems that ensure that First Nations communities have access to safe drinking water now and in the future. We know that further action is required as drinking water issues remain, and we continue to support First Nations in meeting this commitment. With that, I look forward to your questions. Miigwech, Kunanamik, Marcy, thank you.
Thank you, Minister Miller. Gary Vidal, please go ahead for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before I begin, I just want to take a minute and thank the minister and his team for being here. I know you're busy people and it's a challenge. I also want to congratulate the minister on becoming a grandfather recently. I believe that's something new in his life, and from a person that's experienced that recently as well. Best thing ever, right, Mr. Minister? I just want to kind of congratulate you on that. Minister, just over a year ago, we actually were able to meet in person in the committee room in Ottawa, and as we discussed the estimates from the mains for this year and subs from the year before. And you and I had a conversation that time about the philosophy of you working towards eventually ending the role of Indigenous services and Indigenous communities gradually taking over their services and becoming independent. It was you and I had an interaction around the number of jobs that were being added and some of those kinds of things, and we talked about that. Beyond the growth of kind of people in the department, there's been some increase in spending, which, I mean, understandably in COVID, there was, like you said, $4 billion there, but we're also talking about $2 billion over the last 2 years, I believe. A couple other things that I would just throw into the mix here. There's been some really, really significant lost generational opportunities. Keystone XL being one of them for 5 First Nations in Alberta and my province of Saskatchewan. Last week's announcement of the Chevron Canada not being able to find investors for their Kitimat LNG project. And again, a generational opportunity that's lost for 15 First Nations. I've just heard from many Indigenous organizations as I've engaged them about the investment environment being very, very difficult to proceed with projects. I couldn't help but notice in the 2021 department plan, unlike the 2022 department plan, unlike the 2021 plan, where you, in your letter, you referred to this philosophical desire to kind of end the existence of the department. We don't see that in the 2022 plan. A meeting I had last week with one Indigenous economic development leader told me the only solution to solve all of the socioeconomic issues in our communities is jobs, 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 jobs. So my philosophical question for you is, can you explain how the goal of Indigenous self-determination and the elimination of your department long-term can ever transpire without economic prosperity in the communities?
Well, thank you, MP Vidal. You touched on an exceedingly large number of interlocking and important points, and I don't see them as philosophical. I see them as everyday practical points, particularly as you see increased funding going through, not only through the pandemic, but to address a number of longstanding issues, which is the main mandate of which goes through my letter, and the department's mandate, which is to close socioeconomic gaps. So as you see large investments in health, large investments in education, large investments in infrastructure, all elements that are key to closing those socioeconomic gaps, we have to look at ourselves as a department and ask ourselves, are we doing this in the right way? And how does that start? It starts with trusting the voices on the ground that you hear, a number of the ones that you talked to, MP Vidal, and doing infrastructure, health, and education transformation in the way that moves towards self-determination, as encompassed in UNDRIP, as encompassed in a lot of the relationships that we entertain with Indigenous peoples. And we've seen the real net effects of that through COVID. We know that solutions, when they are implemented on the ground, Indigenous peoples know how best to protect their people in a once-in-a-lifetime epidemic. It goes through self-government and it goes through self-determination. So all those elements of economic prosperity tie into your overarching point, MP Vidal, which is, yes, jobs, but also fostering economic parity among Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples, and that's the mandate of the department.
Thank you. So let me just drill a little further into that. Then in the 2021 department plan, under a section called Enabling Economic Prosperity, you talk about supporting capacity building efforts by leveraging greater access to capital. And I just share a quick story from my own riding, where a very, very incredible opportunity for an Indigenous-led group of First Nations, 12 First Nations in Northern Saskatchewan, are looking to invest in an incredible opportunity that's going to be hugely successful. The private industry is all over this if they don't get into it, but yet in the context of reaching out to the exact organizations that you refer to in the department plan, they have not been able to secure any opportunity to gain any equity investment. And I just keep coming back to the fact that it's the equity investment, the opportunity that they have to create own source revenue to help themselves is critical. But yet when they actually have an incredible project where they could do that, that door is being slammed in their face. And that's just a bit of a frustration on the ground, as you talked about.
Yeah, and I'll briefly respond. I get it. Look, whether it's equity investments, whether it's Indigenous big business, small business, or medium business, we know that access to capital has not been there. We've seen those tailored supports that Indigenous Services Canada and the Government of Canada has had to deploy to allow Indigenous businesses, Indigenous innovation to thrive. I hope to see that continue. And these are always conversations that need to happen on many levels and across many levels of government as Indigenous communities are investing and are a bright light in the future in terms of own source revenue, which I would note has been extremely hard hit throughout this pandemic. And as it diversifies and as it becomes a support in the community, we see those programs that it supports. So you'll find no objection from me.
Can I squeeze?
We're rated.
You're not going to let me squeeze one more in, eh, Mr. Chair?
No, I won't. Sorry about that. We have some voting to do before the end of the session. Marcus Pulowski, 6 minutes.
Mr. Minister, you've spoken a fair bit of how our government has tried to help Indigenous communities in dealing with the pandemic. I think you'll agree that the devil's often in the detail. And let me bring up one of those details, which is Thunder Bay, which unfortunately seems to have become the epicenter of COVID in Canada at the moment, with I think the highest rate of COVID anywhere in the country. And it certainly has disproportionately affected the Indigenous population, both within the municipality and adjacent Fort William First Nations. I know as of a week or so ago in the ICU, I think of 18 ventilated patients, 16 were Indigenous. And as of last week, they were also transferring people out of the Thunder Bay ICU to other ICUs because we were full up. My understanding is that Indigenous Services has been assisting both the municipality and Fort William First Nations in the management of our local problem. Can you tell me what your department has done in order to help the people of Thunder Bay? Thank you.
Based on our very initial experience with the pandemic as it first broke out, understanding the limits of how my department operated, usually in the quote unquote on reserve context, understanding quite quickly that COVID doesn't look at that distinction and has impacted Indigenous communities disproportionately. We know the reasons and factors that impact that. But getting those tailored financial resources, resources that money just can't buy, whether it's deployment of the CAF, deployment of surge supports, all those as quickly as possible into settings where we don't necessarily operate effectively, or whether there are other jurisdictions, provincial namely, whose primary responsibility it is. This has been, and we like to say whole of government, but what does that mean? That means municipalities, that means provinces, that means across our departments that have been sometimes accustomed to working in silo and deploying them into communities as quickly as possible. The initial shock point that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic was La Loche, and their response was amazing in the face of overwhelming COVID percentages and quite scary ones. We've seen that happen in repeated ways, and Thunder Bay has in the earlier part of the year and very recently has been one of the examples. Our department moved quite quickly to work with the local health authority to deploy resources up. And through a number of organizations, we funded about $1.89 million in support through the Indigenous Community Support Fund to a number of organizations, including Indigenous communities that have been advocating from the very beginning of the pandemic to support their off-reserve populations. The Nokiwin Tribal Council has been funded to roll out the vaccination clinics for the Indigenous populations in Thunder Bay, among others, that we were able to fund for about $500,000. But there are about a series of a little over a baker's dozen that we supported that are all doing amazing work, have never been funded properly, but we have to do it in the context of this pandemic. But I would also highlight at the same time the amazing work that have been done by the local health authorities and really banding together. We're not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination, but this is one of the areas where we just kind of have to cut through these jurisdictional juggernauts at times to see how we can best serve people in record time, because we do move slower than COVID, and we've seen that time and time again.
Thank you, and on behalf of the people of Thunder Bay, thank you very much for your assistance. I wanted to ask you, because I think this is the third time I've asked you. So if you remember, just kind of as the pandemic was starting, I was asking about what we can do to help prevent COVID spreading to isolated northern Indigenous communities. That, given the experience with H1N1, we were really concerned that this was going to be a disaster. And I think I brought it up in the fall again, and I wanted to just bring it up again to give you an opportunity, because I think you've done a really good job in preventing that happening. And I think the vaccine story is looking like a really positive one in those northern communities. So can you tell us how those communities in Northern Ontario, the isolated fly-in ones, are doing with respect to vaccination at the moment?
Well, I would take this opportunity to highlight, Marcus, the amazing work that's been done by the folks at Ornge in getting vaccination rates in the 90% in a number of communities, despite immense logistical challenges. And this is one of the aspects of the mass vaccination effort in communities. It's not over yet. A lot of communities need to get that second dose, and we'll be there to help them, whether it's assets of the Government of Canada or leveraging those that exist in the province, whatever works. But we're just there to help. I quoted numbers that were aggregate at the very beginning, and I don't like generalizing, because the rollout is still a little uneven, and there are some unnatural fault lines. But as a generalization, if you take the 200,000+ vaccinations that have occurred in Indigenous communities or in the territories, we're sort of halfway there in terms of the Indigenous population. Now, that may vary from a southern community to a northern community, which is why I hesitate to generalize. But this is a race against the clock, particularly in the face of a potential third wave that is fueled by variants of concern. And along with the suite of tools that we deploy, including point of care testing, we've got about 400 units deployed now, including the GeneXpert ones, which were the early leaders and the reliable ones. But whether it's the ID Now or others, that's to help that point of care testing that is complementing not only the vaccine rollout, but the secure fly-in, fly-out communities with our health workers. That the last thing they want to do is be a vector of spread. That continues, and we continue to learn. But it is something that I think Canadians can be quite proud about, because we really focus on those that are vulnerable.
Thanks, Minister. Moving on to Madame Bérubé for 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Mr. Miller. Minister Miller, I don't see any requests for Estimate C for the renovation of housing, yet we do know that in Indigenous communities, there's a lot of overcrowding for lack of housing, and that is not ideal, especially during a pandemic. We know that there's more than 8,000 residences lacking just in Quebec. So what are you doing for housing for Quebec Indigenous peoples? There are a number of initiatives underway. I would note the initiative of the Seychelles Rapid Housing, building some 55 houses in the Cree Nation in Quebec. That's an initiative under the minister. And of course, these are shared envelopes, shared by a number of different departments and also the CMHC, but it's not necessarily just my department that is the only point of contact for housing. Clearly, there is a housing deficit in Indigenous communities, and there's a lot more work to be done in the, whether it be in the far north or even those communities farther south. We know that with COVID, with the problem of overcrowding, you just have spread of the virus. So this is something we have to keep in mind at the end of the pandemic. We have to invest in housing to ensure that we do away with this housing deficit. And of course, there's the medical optic and the importance of housing. We know that in Far North, we've had problems of tuberculosis, and we know it's often because of overcrowding. So imagine with a worldwide pandemic. So you've raised a very good point, but those are budgetary envelopes that are shared by many different departments. You know that the Bloc proposes that the federal government be inspired by the Quebec government strategy in Bill 66 for building of necessary infrastructure and housing to improve the health of Native communities, including housing for seniors. Do you want to be inspired by our Quebec initiative? I will certainly take it into account, but I am not the only decision maker in cabinet. But I'm very closely monitoring initiatives, be they from the Bloc or from other parties. I will certainly be paying close attention. We do hope that the federal government envisages reviewing its decisions to reduce by 8% not-for-profit housing. And it's in regard to 2021 and CMHC. Will you envisage increasing financing? We'd love to increase the funding. I'm going to have to look at that proposal more carefully before I can comment on it. Is there any hope? There is always hope. When we talk about drinking water, the Auditor General office said there was no regulation in place with regard to drinking water in First Nations communities. Why is it that the department has not come up with a regulatory framework for drinking water in First Nations communities? And what measures is the department taking to put in place a regulatory framework? Madame Bérubé, with all due respect, I wouldn't like people to think that there is a legal or regulatory void. There's an entire team at Indigenous Services Canada that is very focused on drinking water. There's testing being done constantly. For instance, the legislative framework that was introduced by the Conservative government was very strongly criticized by First Nations because there was no investment in resources to eliminate the advisories over the long term. That was something that was inappropriate and given the context. Now, with our work with the Assembly of First Nations, among other stakeholders, there are efforts being made to strengthen the regulatory framework, but I certainly wouldn't want anyone to think that there is a void. There are standards in place as to whether an advisory be short-term, long-term, and that's very stringent. We know the vital importance of drinking water. Now, that certainly was one of the criticisms underscored by the Auditor General. Now, thank you.
Blaney, 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here with us today to answer these very important questions. You know, recently I was actually approached by a grade 1-2 split class through their principal, Jasmine Marshman from Henderson Elementary in Powell River. They were very concerned about the lack of safe drinking water in First Nations communities across Canada because they had seen information about the Auditor General's report. And they were so motivated that they actually wrote multiple letters to the Prime Minister and made sure that I also received a copy of those so that their voices could be heard. And I think it's quite telling when a grade 1-2 class in Powell River is willing to stand up and talk about this. And they want to hear more about what you're going to do about it and what this government is going to do about it. And I appreciate there has been some success, but we saw in the Auditor General's report that very clearly there still isn't enough support. And the high risk assessment, medium and high risk assessment of water systems, the percentage still stays around 43%. So even with the successes, there's still these continual things popping up, which means Indigenous people continue to face the challenge. And I always think of one of the chiefs in my riding who said, what we continue to see with levels of government is incremental justice. So a little bit of justice when it's convenient. And I think that this is something that really we need to look at. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the plans that your department may have around updating operations and maintenance funding formulas. We know that those were developed 30 years ago and can't possibly reflect the advances in technology and actual cost of maintenance. And I think that's important because what we're hearing from Indigenous communities, from First Nations communities, is that their water system operators are being paid 30% less than folks in other places. And this is an ongoing concern of not having the amount of resources that they need to legitimately start the system, making sure that the regulatory process is clear and consistent and makes sense to everyone. I hear your resistance around the legislative framework, but we need something stronger than this. And obviously not paying people right and looking at systems from a 30 years ago window frame. I'm just wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for that. You'll note that with the lifting of the Wet'suwet'en long-term water advisory, that leaves only one left in BC, and we're cautiously optimistic about that in in the next little while, and it'll be something really to celebrate and lift up. Look, clearly, there are a number of elements in the Auditor General's report that are very compelling. When I was named minister about 15 months ago, I sat down with my team and said, there may be elements that perhaps don't fall, strictly speaking, into the context of lifting a long-term water advisory that we need to address through additional funding, through a number of other elements. This is before COVID hit, and so I asked my team to sit down and come up with what that might look like. And what came back with a lot of the engagement was obviously the O&M, the operations and maintenance of what is a critical water asset. What communities were telling us was important to hit to get to the deadline of lifting all the water advisories. I think that is something that is important for all First Nations, whether they're on long-term water advisories or not. But a lot of the questions that would come with that was, well, what are you going to do after March 2021? Where are you going to be? Are you going to disappear like you did before? These all kind of turn around very important points that you raised, which is around the deficiency in the funding model, which was for the benefit of everyone, was an 80-20 model where the government would give 80% and 20% the community would be asked contribute. And with a state-of-the-art asset like a plant, particularly some of the new ones that are being built, the people in there need to get, as you said, equal pay for equal work, and those people are the pride of their communities. And you can't blame someone if they want to go somewhere else, or if they get pulled into another community, which is often non-Indigenous, paying them more. It just isn't fair. And so there was a lot of discussions around the funding model and making sure there was more of a perpetual funding model that would allow us to fix the O&M gap, because it contributes precisely to that point you said, which is the insecurity and the risk model and profile that the Auditor General looked at. When I saw the medium to high risk category, that risk is with respect to the integrity of the asset, because it is threatened through people that aren't paid properly, through people that have to, through perhaps cutting corners to get people to work there. That integrity of a critical asset puts it at risk. So there's some issues with the sensitivity of what that is measuring, because it's not as if you're looking at crumbling infrastructure. You're looking at all the investment and maintenance in and around a critical asset system for a community. So those are aspects that perhaps fall outside what would be taken to lift a long-term water advisory, i.e., producing safe and clean water, but they are so critical to the lifespan and the asset span of a plant, for example. And they weren't necessarily addressed in prior funding models. And so the announcement in December or late November of $1.5 billion was, yes, designed to address some of the challenges and the costing of dealing with a global pandemic and increased costs in what we might do to support communities that want to build through a pandemic, but also that O&M, which is so critical and that you raised. So it is part of a greater approach to water safety and integrity that was addressed a few months later in the Auditor General's report, and it's something that I'm glad we're moving forward on. There's still more work to do, but at least in terms of financial support and telling communities that the Government of Canada is there for them, that funding is there, and it just has to be rolled out over the coming months.
Thanks, Minister. Thanks, Rachel. And now we go to 5-minute questions with Arnold Viersen. Arnold, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the Minister for being here as well. Appreciate his time today. Back in 2019, only 9 boil water advisories were eliminated. At that rate, it would take 7 more years to eliminate all the remaining water advisories, hoping that none more were established. There were 13 new advisories in that year, so we actually went backwards. And yet the department plan for 2021 claimed that 2020 to 2021 claimed that you would be able to eliminate them all by March. Why was that target not updated earlier?
So I'm looking at some of the timeframes that you're referencing, MP Viersen, and clearly when we going into COVID or just prior to, we were confident to be able to hit that date of March 2021. There are always challenges with infrastructure and building critical assets in communities, as well as relationships that have to be maintained during COVID. So when COVID hit, we did see a slowdown. There's absolutely no question about it. That is something that, in terms of your question, has to go with updating the numbers. And so, as we assessed, and as we're in first 3-4 months as a minister going into a global pandemic, we wanted to be in a position to say, what is the impact of COVID on ensuring that critical assets are built? What do we need, more importantly, than assessing what the challenge is actually moving to fund and support communities through a historical pandemic, not really knowing how different waves will hit, as well as addressing what I addressed to the committee through an answer to MP Blaney, which is the other issues in and around lifting long-term water advisories that touch on water security in communities. And so in order to give Canadians a portrait really of what was going on, we wanted to get a sense of what the delays were, what the causes were, and how we could move quickly to address them. I think you'll see in the updated website that for each community with respect to which a long-term water advisory is still in place, you'll see that there's a work plan and what the ETA is on a number of these. And so,
I met with a number of new Canadians over the summer, and they were they had supported the Liberals in the last election due to the fact that they said, hey, we moved to Canada. Canada is a great country. Canada had given them a lot, and they were concerned about the water advisory, and so that was one of the reasons why they had supported the Liberals. So would you say to those new Canadians that supported you that the failure to remove those water advisories is because of COVID?
If you look at where we were in 2015, MP Viersen, there was 105 long-term water advisories in effect with no plan to remove them. We are now on 102 as of Thursday of last week. And that is real significant progress for thousands of Indigenous households. There has no question been challenges that were due to COVID, and I could name them. You and I could sit together, and I could walk through every community that has challenges. There's no question that those communities and those that have remaining water advisories have wanted additional assurances to where we will be in the long term, which is why I asked my team in March or April to sit down and get a sense of where we're going and how we navigate through a global pandemic to ensure that we're with communities every step of the way, plus address some of those issues that I've talked in prior answers about, which is addressing a failed funding model or a model that wasn't meeting with communities' expectations. So every person that you've spoken to should know that there's a plan for each long-term water advisory to be lifted and the investments there to support it. And I think that's the confidence that the backing of the government of Canada will give communities to lift their water advisories.
So where is the pressure point on the lifting of the advisories? Is that placed on you and your ministry, or is that placed on local communities? Has anybody been where's the pressure point? Where's the piece that we're waiting for?
Very briefly, Minister.
It's important for everyone to realize, to the extent it hasn't been clear up to now, that the government of Canada doesn't lift the long-term water advisories. The communities do. There are a number of communities that have been on long-term water advisories, like Neskantaga, that everyone saw.
So is the ministry pressuring these communities to lift their water advisories?
We always work in partnership to ensure that the water is safe, first and foremost, and then the community takes the decision to lift the long-term water advisories. It's not the position of the government of Canada to pressure a community to lift their long-term water advisory. Neskantaga has been a quarter of a century under a long-term water advisory. They may have had fresh water or good water that is testing clean for 3 months, but there's a confidence level there that still needs to be achieved, and we're not there yet.
Thanks very much. And we go now to Mr. Batiste. Jaime, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for your comments. Last week was a good week for the Mi'kmaq community of Eskasoni. For 4 days, elders, knowledge holders, language speakers were prioritized and received vaccines. Thinking of the anxieties and fears of so many people in my community that were expressed to me just 1 year ago today, and then to be able to say that we've been able to save those language speakers, those knowledge holders, and our elders in our community, and to have the vaccines roll out, it was a very
meaningful thing for our community. And I just want to thank you, Minister, for that. I want to thank the Chief and Council of Eskasoni for the measures they took, as well as the health workers. And so with that, Walalin. I want to stay on health. And I know that it's been a year that we've had a lot of struggles, but one of the things that has dominated headlines is systemic racism within institutions such as health. We all remember the tragedies of Joyce Echechuan and what she had to endure. And I guess my question is around Indigenous people can be apprehensive and reluctant to seek healthcare due to the fear of facing discrimination. And you have been outspoken and a champion for the need for change. Can you please elaborate on the work our government is doing to tackle systemic racism in healthcare?
Well, thank you, MP Batiste, and your advocacy is really exemplary. And I can imagine the amount of pride you must feel to see your community getting priority access. I think it says something about our country that your elders and elders in communities across Canada, those that are the most vulnerable, are getting vaccinated before the Prime Minister or me or anyone that has the privilege to sit in cabinet. That says something about our country. People may say that's a thin veneer. I don't think it is. I think it says something about how we need to conduct ourselves going forward. It's a good lesson to us all. We know the impact of systemic racism, particularly in institutions where people are at their most vulnerable, whether that's the healthcare system or with their interaction with the police. It kills, and it has killed, and it will continue to do so until we fix it. The solutions aren't easy; they're not overnight. If they were overnight, I think it would sort of betray. It would betray how the scope and depth of the problem. There are things that we are doing immediately in Indigenous Services Canada, which is making sure that Joyce Echequan's community is front and center of the continuing conversation over Joyce's principle, which achieves, broadly speaking, substantive equality between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. It's a principle we support, but we're going to need the provinces, we're going to need the territories to be part of this conversation. We all know the jurisdictional spats that we've had with respect to healthcare. And in this case, it's on the backs of Indigenous peoples. There is work that needs to be done within my department in terms of how we transform health, how we provide more mental health supports, which is a key issue coming out of the pandemic, and how we move towards distinctions-based health legislation, which will be a difficult conversation, foremost with Indigenous communities who haven't felt consulted up to now, and recognizing that their way of conceiving their own health needs to be respected and can't be dictated to them from Ottawa. It goes through recognizing that a number of the elements and reports that have been published up to date don't need much further examination. We need to start investing in infrastructure and supporting local infrastructure and local self-governance over health infrastructure. It's key. You perhaps have stories in your community how that's missing compared to a similarly situated community. That's work that the federal government can do. But as you've heard in the elements of my answer, it isn't easy, it's complex. And in the case of the legislation, it will take time because we won't succeed if we don't engage with Indigenous communities. Distinctions-based healthcare legislation that reflects the continuing gap and the treatment of Indigenous peoples as second-class citizens by the healthcare system in this country, regardless of the jurisdiction. I hope I tried to paint a bit of a picture in the couple minutes I had.
Well, you took it right to time. So thank you very much, Minister. And 2.5 minutes each from Madame Bérubé, Ms. Blaney. Madame Bérubé, deux et demi.
Thank you. I would like to continue with drinking water. Because it's very difficult to keep operators in their positions in First Nations communities because of salary problems. So will the department continue to contribute and finance this? The answer, to be brief, is yes. And to give you more financial information, the investment we announced in recent months for 2025 will be fourfold the investment made today. And this is for operations and support to communities for water infrastructures. So that's an accomplishment. And it is something that will transform the situation. And we've had to deal with the fragility of the infrastructures and problems, and we have worked on that.
Excusez, on est en fin de soirée.
Sorry, it's getting late. We talked about the Joyce Principle. What progress is the government making with regard to everything that's unfolded in regard to this young woman? As I said in English in my answer to MP Batiste, this is not something that one can address just over the short term. From the beginning, we've had to make sure that the Manawan community has been at the center of the discussions. In this case, one really has to ensure that Joyce's family and all of the community of Manawan is involved, and have to continue to fight for this principle that is not entirely accepted. It should apply to all provinces, but it is a simple principle. It can't not necessarily be changed overnight, but from the beginning we have committed to doing our fair share, and we have provided financial resources and other supports to the community. And of course, also the option to get health care in other institutions than that particular hospital. Thank you.
And Ms. Blaney will conclude with your 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair. So, Minister, I also have some serious concerns around Indigenous housing and the fact that we still don't have a comprehensive Indigenous housing strategy for Canada. We know that the member from Nunavut went and did a housing tour in her riding, and it was absolutely horrifying to see the realities. People living in substandard housing, mold, overcrowding, just the many, many challenges that those communities are facing. And the NDP is calling for a urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy that is governed and led by Indigenous peoples and housing providers. This is different and unique from the distinction-based Indigenous housing strategy that this government likes to talk about. I'm just wondering, how long are these communities going to have to wait to see housing that is actually, reasonable, where we don't see the overcrowding, which is across Canada, and is really led by those communities, is including rural and urban communities, on reserve, off reserve, and of course the northern communities. How long are they going to have to wait, and when is there going to be a comprehensive strategy that starts to actually deal with this profound challenge that these communities are facing? It's absolutely horrific. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, and thanks for the question. As I mentioned in a previous response, this pandemic has taught us to look at housing through a health lens, and as Minister Bennett says, it's very hard to mend what you can't measure. Part of my mandate is to complete an infrastructure plan in partnership with Minister Hussen, Minister McKenna, to get a sense of where those investments need to be. It doesn't mean we can't act quickly through short-term housing. And you saw the $1 billion that was announced by Minister Hussen in rapid housing. That will make a difference, but it's very much a small piece of the puzzle, which is really closing that infrastructure gap by 2030. People may seem to think that is a long period of time, but in infrastructure talk, that's actually a pretty short period of time. There are investments that need to be measured, quantified, and have the finances and support of the government of Canada to do so. This government, and it's difficult to contradict it, has made historical investments in housing, but obviously they have not been enough, and they need to continue. That gap is there, and what we've seen through COVID is that it is very much a health concern that has made it such that communities are 3.5 to 5 times more vulnerable to COVID because of, in particular, the crowded living conditions that they live in. And people might say to us, we should have known it, because that is the lived reality of many of the Inuit, and I wouldn't dispute MP Kakak on that point.
Minister, thank you. And thanks to the staff, the ministers for attending today, and for the members of the committee. A very interesting and forthright set of questions. Wonderful discussion today on our topic. And so having thanked the minister and staff, who may now dismiss, it is now my duty to proceed to vote on the supplementary estimates C and main estimates in that order. Now, should the committee wish to proceed as it did previously with estimates, I will ask now if I have unanimous consent to call the votes as a group and adopt them on division. Do we have anyone against that? If we are all in favor of adopting the sub C, thank you very much. We'll take that as a unanimous. And so
on division, yes.
On division, yes, of course. Thanks. And we're all in favor of that. Thank you very much. House divided on division. Anyway, so once again, we don't have to go through all of those. So having adopted the supplementary estimate C on division, I can ask the committee now, shall I report the supplementary estimates C 2021 to the House? Is everyone good with that? I see a majority of hands. Thank you very much. And so on to the main estimates. Once again, if we can proceed as we just did, do I have unanimous consent to call the votes as a group and adopt them on division? Are we good with that? I'm seeing a unanimity in thumbs, which is great. And so once again, because there were a lot of votes that would have had to take place there. Having adopted the main estimates 2021 on division, shall I report the main estimates 21-22 to the House? All in favor? I see a total agreement. So we are agreed, and thank you, everyone. We are also adjourned. We'll see you tomorrow. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.